Ladies, it's just wonderful that we can be here today. Today, the war is over, the Revolutionary War is over. We are a republic, and we can be proud of what our forefathers and our present members have done. It's nice of you, thank you very much. This, if you haven't met her, this is Deborah Sampson. And Deborah, you've invited us to this tea, and it's going to be lovely because we're going to talk about the things that we did.
Well, ladies, I am so glad you could be here today. We all need these days of remembrance.
Yes.
And I would like to bring my tea up and toast us ladies because we all performed vital service to the Revolutionary War.
We did.
To the Revolution.
To the Revolution.
And I want to tell you ladies that I have been classified officially as a soldier in the Revolutionary War. I stood beside my husband John carrying ammunition, and when he died, I carried on for him, and I am the first woman to be pensioned as a soldier.
I think that's wonderful.
Bravo.
I tried to get one, but I didn't. You know, Mr. Washington served without any kind of a remuneration, but I thought maybe I would get something, but I didn't. But here you did.
Even I did.
I'm very proud
Even you
of the
did.
fact.
That's
Even I
wonderful.
did. You know, the state of Massachusetts did give me a pension of 34 pounds lump sum. And then, thanks to Paul Revere, I did get $4 a month a U.S. pension.
That's
Speaking
excellent.
of Paul Revere, I think we ought to hear a little bit from Sybil, don't you?
Oh,
Yes.
oh, it was
Come on,
it was a very rainy, cold night, and the British had sacked Danbury, and it was. I knew I had to get out and get to the militiamen so that they could ride in, and so I rode on my father's horse.
How
And
far?
40 miles. I started at 9 at night. I used my father's musket because there were all sorts of men on the road, and I was just scared to death, but I kept yelling at every farmhouse to meet at the Ludingtons, to muster
Did you use
there.
your side saddle?
No, I used my father's saddle because I couldn't stay on. It was raining so hard, and I had to hold on to the mane because I only had a halter for the
And
horse.
how old were you?
I was 16. I just turned 16. It was frightening,
Yeah.
but it was really very exciting that night.
Did you apply for a
No, I was just a child, and they just considered the fact that I did a fine thing, but other than that, they didn't really
It was
give
a
me
fine
much.
thing
Well,
that you
it
did.
was
Did
a
you
fine
realize-
thing that you
Yeah.
Do
did.
you realize that it was farther than Paul Revere
Revere.
did?
And
so
it was
you did a very fine
It was
more
thing.
raining.
dangerous.
It was
Yes.
so cold that night when I got back. I got back about 6 in the morning.
Wow.
And I had to take care of the horse, and he was as tired as I was.
Oh, now he was.
But you know that's good because I brought something to show you
Yes, I
about
wondered
children
about that.
and
Yeah.
the help that children were. I'm Rebecca Barrett, and my husband was a colonel in the militia. And of course, he was gone, and I took care of the farm with my kids. And periodically, the British would come by looking to see if there were any people hiding in the barns or anything. And they always wanted food when they came, so we'd feed them. And they interacted with my children, and the children saw them making these things, which are the cartridges for the muskets. And they taught my children to make them. And every soldier, they're just little tubes of paper, and they had to be rolled and then filled with gunpowder, and then the shot went in on top of that. Then they folded them up and tucked the little end in like that, and every time they shot, they had to load the musket with this. And when the soldiers got ready to shoot, they would pull this out, rip off the end with their teeth, and pour the powder in the musket, tamp it down
Wow.
with a rod, then throw the shot in, and when they pulled the trigger, it ignited the gunpowder and shot. And my kids, this is very tedious, tiresome work. But every evening as we sat around the fire, the kids and I made these, and that's how we helped the soldiers, making sure they always had ammunition. But you helped the Continental Army soldiers.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't do it for the British. The British taught us. The British taught us how to do it.
Did you have to learn to mix the saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal together for the
Yes,
gunpowder?
yes.
Everything?
Yes. And
Wow.
you had to load it. It was very tedious and time consuming. But
And you were just
that
a
was-
young girl?
No, I was a mother.
Oh, you
My
were a
children. and taught me how to do it too. And we sat around and did
So
it
we
every
have
night.
pride in your children too.
Yes.
They took their part in the war too.
That's right.
So
Their
did they
dad.
teach you how to fire the musket?
I already knew how, living on a farm all by myself.
So teeth were
guess.
required to do
Teeth
it.
required to tear out. Yes.
Well, I was a Quaker widow living in Burlington County, New Jersey, while all this fighting was going on around us, and they would bring in the injured and the ill, lots of fever, and they would bring them in from all camps, from the British and the Continental Army soldiers. They would bring them into Burlington, where I practiced my art of medicine. I was skilled in my early days, and I went to the homes where they carried these sick and injured and healed them. And surprising enough, I healed all of them.
Oh, Margaret,
How
I
wonderful.
Yes,
God must have blessed you mightily.
That's wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, so I didn't get on the battlefield or do any of that.
Oh,
Just
you
in
did such
homes.
wonderful things, though.
But I saved some soldiers.
We were all needed.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, there were
Returned them to their
dangerous
families
times.
and to their units to fight again.
Yes,
Yes, indeed.
Well, Margaret, I could have used you. You know, I still have this leg problem when, you know, I impersonated a man. I was the first woman to ever impersonate a man to join the Continental Army.
Yeah.
And when we were in West Point, I did get wounded.
Oh,
And, you know, because I didn't want him to know I was a woman,
yes, yes.
I kind of took care of my own wounds. But, you know, it didn't really heal properly, but I could have used you then, Margaret.
I have a lot of herbs and things that I can give you to rub on that,
Okay,
and it will take care of it.
okay,
I
thank
promise.
I too am a Quaker.
Yes, yes.
And my husband was a tutor, so he was often gone. I became a spy for the Continental Army. My son, my oldest son, Charles, was serving with General Washington. And I would get information, and then I would sew them into buttons. I had a little code that he knew, my son knew, and he would pass this information to General Washington. My husband was a tutor, so he was often gone. I became a spy for the Continental Army. My son, my oldest son, Charles, was serving with General Washington. And I would get information, and then I would sew them into buttons. I had a little code that he knew, my son knew, and he would pass this information to General Washington. At one point, Howe was the general for all the English troops, and he lived across the street from me. He had servants that liked to speak, and he also had his lieutenants and stuff have meetings at my house. I could eavesdrop on these easily, and so what I did was I found out that they were going to do a surprise attack on General Washington's troops the very next day in the evening. So I asked General Howe for a pass because I needed flour, and I told him I'd been feeding his people when they had their meetings there, and so I had to go across the line onto the Continental side to get the flour bag filled. Then I went to my son, and he put me with one of General Washington's troops, and I told them about this battle that was to come. And then I calmly went home, went back, got my flour, and went home. I didn't apply for a pension because I didn't want my husband to find out what I'd been doing.
Oh, probably a good idea.
Being Quakers, it was not the right thing to do, but it really was the right thing to
Well,
do.
you know, Mr. Washington appreciated very much what you did, Lydia. He kept things pretty close to the chest, but he did tell me about you, and
Well,
he was
that's
very proud
nice.
of your
That's
service.
nice to know.
I was with Mr. Washington at all the encampments. That's something a lot of people don't know.
I
But it
didn't
was
know
his
that, Martha.
practice to send, toward the end of a campaign, he would send an aide de camp to Mount Vernon to bring me, accompany me to the camp. And I would be there for the closing cannon. And then I would be there for the opening cannon of the next battle. And then I had to go back home because I had work to do at home in keeping the Mount Vernon going. It was a big plantation. We had a lot to do.
Yeah.
But I was very pleased to be able to do this, and you know, the men liked it. I mean, they treated me, when I would come in, they'd come and cheer as I'd ride in.
How wonderful.
Yeah, it was
Well,
wonderful
you
because
deserve it.
they treated me like their mother. I mean, they would come to me with their problems, and I was able to solve them. I was able to organize the people, the women who were there as camp followers, and many of whom were the widows of soldiers and had no other way to earn a living. In order to eat, they were doing that. So we'd organize them into seamstresses and laundresses and cooks and various other jobs. And so I felt I did a part, but nothing compares to the stories that you ladies are telling.
Oh,
Well,
just traveling back and forth.
Excuse me, ladies. I think we have more company. I'll get them back.
Oh, please do that. I thought we were missing one, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, they were dangerous times.
They were dangerous.
Frightening.
Yes.
Frightening.
But still, what we did as though we were unafraid. You know, I think
we
it
were
was
the women
because the
troops.
Lord was with us.
Yep.
Yes.
And He has told us He will always be with us. And I think that gave us courage to go forth and do what we had to do.
I think women always stand up for what
Yes.
they have
Yes.
to do.
So good to see you.
Hi.
Mary.
So,
Good to see you.
Yes, it's lovely.
Molly,
Nice to have you with us.
good morning, ladies.
good morning.
Yes.
Molly, why don't you tell us about your story? Because it's so wonderful.
Yes. Well, it's quite a story. I'll probably just tell you about the Battle of Mammoth, although I had met Martha at Vernon and also Valley Forge
And
in
Valley Forge in
1777. It was
Wow.
cold.
Wow.
Anyway, the Battle of Mammoth. Your husband was not pleased with the engagement. He was headed with the troops to march to New York when the British presented themselves. My dear husband William was an artilleryman, and he was loading the cannons and fighting. And my job was to carry water from site to site where the cannons were and keep the barrels filled, because those cannons got so hot with the saltpeter and the sulfur and the charcoal. Thank you. And
Yes.
so
lot of
they
people
had
got
to use a sponge on a stick to clean out the barrel every 6 or 7 shots and pour water over the barrels to keep it cool so that they could re-engage the next rounds. In doing that, that day was so hot, it was 100+ degrees,
Oh
and the
my
men were
God.
just,
My Lord.
they were just dying of the heat. And I'd be carrying my buckets and they'd want water, and I'd take my little pitcher and I'd bring them some of the cool spring water, and they'd be refreshed. And so it got to be, they would just say, "Molly, pitcher," and I knew what they want. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw my husband fall right by his cannon.
Oh, my.
Oh, how terrible.
I dropped my buckets. I was so angry. I ran up and I saw them carry him off the battlefield. I didn't know whether he was wounded, whether he was dead, whether he had succumbed to the heat. I didn't know, but all I knew, I was angry, and I picked up that ramrod and I started to join the men with firing that cannon and firing that cannon and firing that cannon. I can still hear that sound booming in my
I
ears.
think you have heard it.
I think
I have heard it a few times. I hear it in my sleep yet. But you know, your husband on his steed is purported to have seen my action, and he directed General Greene to commission me as Sergeant Molly. And so I held a commission in the Continental Army. And in time, after the war ended in 1883, I was given a pension
You
by
got
the
one too,
great
huh?
state of Pennsylvania, $40 a year.
Well,
and
you
it
did
made
better
all
than
the
I did
difference in the world.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Well, you know, Mary, after that, after you became the Molly pitcher, the men always referred to any woman who was assisting with water. They called them all Molly pitchers. So you were the original Molly pitcher.
And your name was
And we'd
famous.
like to hear more about what you had done. We're all just sharing some of our experiences. The war is over, and we'd like to hear a little bit about what you did.
Well, my name is Mary Hagedorn, and when I was young, much younger than I am now, I was in the upper fort at Schoharie Valley. There were 3 forts there, and the forts were.
That was in New York.
It was in New York, in the place of the present Falmouth, New York, and there were 3 forts along this very long valley, so that the different citizens could have a place to hide if there was an attack by Indians or the British. And so this one day in October of 1780, we knew, because they were marching 127 miles overland, that there was a troop of almost 1,000 men, British soldiers, loyalists, Tories, Indians, and some German soldiers were coming to take over our valley. And we knew they would attack the main fort, the middle fort. But each fort was defended by citizens, and I was in the upper fort. And when they were coming to attack our fort, the captain, a lovely young man by the name of Jacob Hager, said, "Women and children to the long cellar." And I stood up and I said, "I shan't go to the long cellar. I shall take a spear, which I can handle as well as any man, and I'll man the battle."
And I fought as well as any man too.
You certainly did.
You know, being a
And did you
being a
get a
tall woman, I was 5'7", so found my breast and off I went to join.
Well, how did they find out that you were a woman?
Well, I didn't. After I did get the wound in the leg, we went on to Philadelphia, and I came down with the fever, and I didn't have Miss Margaret there, so the doctor who attended me wasn't a female, and he did discover that I was. So,
Oops. What did you continue?
he did very discreetly have me honorably discharged by General Henry Knox.
You know, Henry Knox was at Valley Forge. Do you
Yes,
remember
yes,
him?
I remember Henry. Yeah.
Ah, to know his mind. What he picked up and did with our treasury.
It was all a part of the wonderful new country that we founded. I know you ladies have all helped.
Yes. Did you apply for a pension?
No, I never did. No, I was so young.
Yeah.
I think we're the only 2 then.
No,
she
there's
got
3.
one.
I got a
Yeah.
pension.
Yes, you got one.
That's right. You said
I think
you
it had
did
more
also.
to do with being seen by somebody who was in the powers that be.
Yes.
Well, I thank Paul Revere for mine.
See, there
Well,
you go.
Well, he was such a wonderful man.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
predict that in years to come, there will be many times that you ladies' services will be remembered. And I think that as patriots, you have done a real service, and Mr. Washington and I are very proud.
Well,
Thank you.
We're
We're proud of
Thank
you.
you so much for having us
thank you for
today.
coming
so much.
today.
Yes, we've really enjoyed this. It's been lovely.
What an honor to be the wife of first president.
President of the United States.
Oh, yes.
Martha, do
It was a
tell
very expensive. It was a very expensive.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Do
We
tell us
had to
what
keep
it's like.
feeding people that would come to Mount Vernon. It was very expensive.
I bet.
We had to sell some of the slaves, and oh Lord help me, that's another thing that we deplored, but it had to keep Mount Vernon going
But
in
it's
those
so
days.
beautiful.
It is.
But you know, Martha, to this day, I use your cookbook.
Oh really?
Yes, your 4 kinds of cheeses
And
and
how
how to.
about that birthday? I mean that cake.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was wonderful,
And
and
the
the
fudge.
sweet meats
Oh, the
and
fudge.
candies, and And the pickled meats.
Well, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you do.
You know,
we have to carry on. We're women, and that's what we do.
We do.
After
Indeed.
all,
that
we've
is one
already
of the
fought
most
war.
important, history is going to report that as one of the most important historic cookbooks ever.
Oh, my goodness.
Because, you know, feeding our families is a full-time job. You know, the crops come and they go, but to keep them preserved for meal times months
yes.
down the road, what does a woman do?
We have to make it through the winter.
And you know, there were some other women that we haven't talked about that served in a great way, and these were the ordinary women that would take to the spinning wheel, and they would provide homespun uniforms for our men, and they would provide blankets for the men. So the women, not only were these ladies involved in the war, but there were many others, weren't they, that just ordinary women stood up and did their part in this important.
Whether we dressed as men or went as women, right?
Well, they say the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, and as your
there we
children
go.
did
Isn't that the truth?
fill the ordinances for the muskets, those little children, 3 and 4, were taught to weave on a hand loom to make our laces and our shoelaces and all kinds of cords, and then they would graduate when they were older to these larger looms. Of course, that is a carriage weaver and spinning wheel that they would take in the carriage, because this is a great luxury for us all to sit here with idle hands.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
And I think they grew the cotton right there at Mount
Yes,
Vernon.
right. We had many acres of land, and Mr. Washington every morning, early in the morning, he'd get up and he'd ride the area, making sure everything's all right, and he'd come back then for breakfast. And I had all these keys hanging on. I had to lock all the keys.
Oh, yes.
You know, because you knew we had so
Never
many
knew.
people
The
that might
chatterling?
take it. And they had drugs in there as well as medicines, as well as foods that we had to keep. So it was a busy time. It was a busy time.
Martha, I wanted to ask you about Billy Lee.
Oh,
You know,
That's right.
they say he is an unsung hero of the American Revolution, that he
Yes.
was the mulatto slave
He was
bought by your husband
he was
and his
my
brother.
He was his favorite slave, and he took him to Mount Vernon, and to Trenton and to Valley Forge, and he was with him all the way.
They said that he was quite a horseman, almost as good as your husband, and that your husband actually felt that Billy Lee was a companion and friend. He even had him do his personal grooming and put his cue in his hair every day. You know that little ponytail that
yes,
hangs
he did.
down?
Yes, he had to do that because I wasn't there to help.
Well, you were tending with your nursing and cooking duties. How could you? But Billy Lee, I understand, Washington gave him outright his freedom upon his death.
Oh, yes.
And
Oh,
left all
yes.
the rest of the servants to your discretion.
What a kind thing to do.
Yes.
Kind thing to do.
Also, Sybil, I wanted to ask you, now that the war is over and you've made this wonderful ride, what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm only in my early 20s, and I am thinking of getting married.
Oh, excellent.
My father is decided that this is possibly a good thing, and in the spring I will probably be married.
Well, that's
very good.
excellent.
Do you
Have any say as to your
Yes, as a young man that I met the night of the ride, he became a great friend because he championed
romance?
me. Yes.
I loved to ride. As a young child, I rode everywhere. I even rode my horse up into a home once, and my father was astonished. But I admire what you did. Oh,
Riding was wonderful, though, but we used to go out on the,
and it
after
wasn't
the war,
side
we went
saddle
out.
either.
Martha, you're quite a woman.
We all are quite.
I think we all are.
We're
How
all
about,
very
how about a toast to us
To us, the
and
women
all the
patriots
ladies who served
the
that we
American
don't know
Revolution.
about?
Yeah.